Welcome back to The Decision 2024, brought to you by Valuetainment and Vtnews.ai. A lot happened this past week as we're entering the final 3 weeks, less than that actually, of the campaign. Last week, we had Trump trolling Kamala at McDonald's, some very interesting new national polls that had been withheld and just came out with some surprising results. We've got crosstabs identifying how America has really been polled and what they've been saying about that, as well as a whole bunch of new numbers coming out of the swing states. So what are we covering first?
Let's go ahead and drive through McDonald's and find out exactly what happened there with Donald Trump out in Pennsylvania. He decided, I'm going to go ahead and work at McDonald's, and I'm going to work the fries, which, by the way, is the hardest job at McDonald's, if you guys didn't know. And he's going to do that for 15 minutes, which will mean that he has worked at McDonald's for 15 minutes longer than Kamala Harris ever did. The footage was amazing. I don't know about you, but I found it so heartwarming, especially the people who were driving through, who were so surprised to see Donald Trump handing them their fries, handing them their meal. And some of the sentiments they shared with him were just really, truly so heartwarming, and gives me a lot of hope in where things are heading so far as Pennsylvania goes.
And there was no comment from McDonald's corporate or any of their franchise operators that had any record of Kamala Harris ever working there in the first place.
And so now let's go ahead and roll into our national polls. As you guys know, we usually feature Rasmussen reports here. They're our go-to source for the daily polls when it comes to the national. However, we have just seen that AtlasIntel brought out brand new national polls. As you will remember, this was the #1 most accurate pollster from the last election. And so we're going to dive in now and share a little bit more about their results. Tom, what are we seeing here?
What we're seeing here is very, very interesting. You know, Democrats win the popular vote. It's been that way for several elections. So on a national basis, the way they calculate it, to have it like this is not surprising to me, but we're seeing anything from 2% Kamala to actually 1% Trump. What it shows you is that the race is very tight, but on a national basis, if a Republican candidate is showing anything close to null value, basically split, what it shows is on a national basis, if a Republican candidate is showing anything close to neutral, tied, that usually means that that election is at peril for the Democrat candidate because they tend to have a liberal lean on a national basis on the strength of New York and California's population, and you expect a national popular vote to favor the Dems. The other ones that are coming out showing nearly tied or even a 1/10 or a 1/2 point for Trump for 2 that came out this past weekend usually is not good news for the liberal or Democratic candidate. Now let's dive into it a little bit more because we were curious about this poll. So we said, well, let's dive into the crosstabs. The crosstabs tells you what's in the poll and what do people think. Interesting things here. Independents breaking 53-45 for Donald Trump. You would expect the independents to be a little bit more spread. Also, college educated, this has been consistent to see the lead that she has had 57-41. You take away people that are non-college educated, it goes the other way, 59-41 for Donald Trump. Also, when you go take a look at the income spans, people that are making above 100 grand, which lines up with college education, tend to break more for Kamala Harris, whereas those under true working class America are breaking 54-45 or 46 for Kamala Harris. So basically what it's showing us is the race is still razor thin, but the people that Trump has been doing well with, men, and then Trump has done better with independents, those things are standing up as we run into the last weeks of the campaign. So let's go back and dive into the betting odds. A lot of you like that. We covered that last week, and Amy's going to cover that right now, and then we're going to dive into the states and see what the swing states look like specifically.
So Trump is absolutely dominating when it comes to the PolyMarket betting odds. Last week, we actually added in a stitch to show you where the PolyMarket bets were updated from when we filmed. At the time that we filmed, it was like 8.5%. That grew all the way to like 22%. And right now, that spread has widened even further. We're now looking at about a 25-point spread, which is one of the largest that we've seen in the PolyMarket betting odds for any of these prior elections. We can see that Trump is taking even more of a dominant lead in all of the swing states. You will remember that last week we showed that the blue wall specifically, or two portions of it, Wisconsin and Michigan, were very, very tight. We can now see that Trump is taking a lead there, as well as Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. Now, let's go ahead and dive back into those AtlasIntel polls and talk a little bit about the swing states.
Well, what we're seeing in some of the battleground states is the AtlasIntel data that came out seems to be a tiny bit behind some of the other polling. And when I say a tiny bit behind, some of the other polling is showing a little bit more lead or a little bit less behind for either candidate in spaces. For instance, it says AtlasIntel has Michigan at 2.9 for Trump. We are seeing it razor thin and about 0.5 for Trump or 0.5 for Harris, which really makes a jump ball tie game in Michigan. But we are seeing Georgia absolutely locked, as well as Arizona absolutely locked. But AtlasIntel has got those hanging by a thread. If we go back and just take a look real quick at the betting markets, look what the betting markets are saying. And these betting markets tend to be more sophisticated individuals who are actually out there putting real money on the campaign stakes. Now, true, there's a lot of people in there with $10 or $20 bets that are in there doing things a little bit differently. But what we're seeing is Arizona and Georgia, that's kind of the percentages we are seeing Arizona and Georgia, yet AtlasIntel is still showing basically toss-up. By their own numbers, they should be showing Georgia red. But I had a feeling that there was some neutrality that was put here, because if you make Georgia red, this is 271 and it's done.
Let's analyze those states a little bit further to see, based on the last 5 polls, who is really ahead. And so, analyzing the most recent Arizona polls, we could see that CBS News put out the most recent one that actually showed Trump up ahead by 3 points. In fact, the only poll that shows Harris up ahead is actually the Wall Street Journal. As you'll remember, we covered those polls a couple of weeks back. They show Harris ahead +2. And overall, our aggregate has Trump up at plus 1.8. And now diving into North Carolina. Now, as you remember, this is a state that we were a little bit concerned about due to the possibility of voter suppression and people being unable to actually cast their ballot due to the devastation that recently took place with Hurricane Helene. AtlasIntel actually released a poll from the 17th of this month. That one does show Harris up by +2, possibly proving the theory and speculation that we shared with you in the last episode. However, aside from that and the one prior from Quinnipiac, we can see that Rasmussen and Emerson both have Trump up overall. Trump is up by +5 when it comes to the Rasmussen reports, and by just under a point at 0.06 when it comes to the Emerson polls.
Now let's go back to Georgia. I was just talking about Georgia a minute ago. So we are seeing Georgia increasingly locked, and we are also seeing polls that are showing up. The polls are now at 2 points with a 3-point margin of error. We are almost at a point where the margin of error and the margin of the poll are equal or greater, which means that the candidate in the lead suddenly jumps up into about a 75% probability of victory, as long as the poll is a disciplined poll. And these are 1,400 likely voters by AtlasIntel ending last week. It's overall the freshest and the biggest sample. So now you've got here Trump 2, Trump 6. Even take out the Trump 6, this is calculating out to Trump 1.9. So we're in a position in Georgia where suddenly all of the pollsters coming together, even left-leaning Quinnipiac, who is projecting a +6 of all things. Now, I think this is fairly overstated because it's way outside the margin of victory. So this would be Quinnipiac saying basically they've got Georgia more than leaning almost safe Trump if you were to look at those scales. Very interesting stuff. We go to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, if you take a look, the same thing is starting to happen here. There were 2 polls, one from Rasmussen, one from Atlas, showing Trump at 3, which is outside or equal to the margin of victory. Now you see that's what starts to happen. And those were large polls, especially Atlas's 2,048 likely voters.
Wow.
The bigger the sample, the better it is, especially if it's likely voters, as long as when you dive into the crosstabs, there's not some obvious, oh, this is obviously a D3 poll, meaning you would expect 3 points Democrat based on the political affiliations, voting in the past, or other stated dynamics. So the swing states are coming together. We're diving in as much as we can. The polls are starting to space out. There are fewer polls being conducted because most of these polls are sponsored. A $300,000 sponsorship for a poll is not unusual, and you can go look up at the polls and find out who paid for it. At this time of the race, frequently you find the polls begin to get slightly more accurate. Let me tell you why that is. Because now they're looking for absolute accuracy of the polling to completely understand. The internals are fighting for that every day. Whereas a month ago, sometimes the polls get used, actually oftentimes the polls will get used to spin a story with the media. Oh, look, we're up here or up there, trying to project momentum for the candidate, which does have an influential effect on the undecided voters that are true leaners, to see if we can just push them a little bit. Then there's undecided voters that are truly thoughtful about their choice. It's harder to just do it with perception and mainstream media compliance with the story. But nonetheless, that's where we are at.
And so now it is time for our Valuetainment Call. This is the culmination of all of the data we just showed you, plus our own aggregate through VT Analytics to bring you our call just 2 weeks from the election. Can you believe next week we're going to be saying 1 week from the election? So Tom, what are we seeing right now?
What are we seeing? Well, right now we're seeing Trump at 77%, with North Carolina lighter than Georgia. Georgia getting redder, Arizona getting redder, North Carolina a little bit lighter than that, because we still don't know what is going to happen to these outlying areas that were affected by the hurricane, whether those votes will be tabulated in time or at all. Many people may have mailed them in. As a matter of fact, there were mail-in ballots that, for fact, there's been interruption of mail service. So where are they? Are they all there? So North Carolina already thin, but are the votes going to get counted? So I see that a little lighter. But I'm seeing Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona is increasingly going from lean to almost sort of likely. I'm not ready to call that over, but it's very, very close, which takes us to 281. When you take North Carolina out of it, that becomes 271, 265. So a Wisconsin trade for North Carolina would do the trick. Nevada looks increasingly, my hunch is that it's going blue based on everything we're seeing. It's right there, Razor, but there simply hasn't been a preponderance of polls that say Trump 1.5, Trump 2. We're seeing everything right down the middle, and Kamala plus 0.5 or 1. And since you haven't even seen 1 or 2 polls, we leave it in the toss-up, but I'm really believing Nevada at this point on our scale would be light blue, which means that this is now 232 to 281. Needless to say, it would not surprise me if Wisconsin and Michigan went Trump, but I maintain that I think that Michigan is probably light blue based on everything we're seeing. We're looking at demographics, voter turnout in Detroit, excitement in Detroit, among things, but a lot of bad news for the Harris campaign with union polling.
So that's where things are currently sitting now. Of course, so much can change within a period of 7 days. And when it gets down to this far in the election, it usually does. And so next week, we'll be covering all of the swing state polls, any breaking news. Plus, coming up, we also have Valuetainment's Election Watch Party. Now, this is, of course, going to take place at our brand new facility based out here in Florida. If you want to come in person, we're going to have a link placed down in the description so you can go and check it out, see what the night is all about. But we're going to be there covering the data live in person. There's going to be some extra special guests, and we can't wait to see you there, whether it be on your screen tuning into the live stream or whether you come and check it out in person. So again, tickets for that and information is going to be available in the description down below.
We'll be back next week, next Thursday, with another edition, just like we have been. And until then, we'll let the candidates talk. We'll let the handlers spin.
Because at the end of the day, words talk, but numbers scream. My name is Amy Dangerfield.
And I'm Tom Ellsworth, the Biz Doc. See you next time. Subscribe down below and find the link for the Valuetainment Live Election Watch Party.